Dynasty Nerds on Better Sports Network.
Welcome back in. It is the Better Sports Network. It is Dynasty Nerds, and I am your host, Garret Price. And man, it is good to be back on this lovely Thursday evening. We are officially in the month of June. And a little secret, my birthday's in June. Father's Day's in June. Great baseball is in June. Just got done with Memorial Day. Great things on Memorial Day. Smoked some ribs. They were delicious. But you guys don't want to know about all that. Oh, yes. And I did just get my hair cut. Hopefully it looks okay, because I know that is typically a topic of conversation as to whether or not my hair looks good that night. Welcome back in. Thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. We got a great show planned. Awesome show planned. I'm very, very excited. Of course, later on this evening, 10:15, Dennis Bennett will be back as always. He took a week off last week to get to see his son's graduation. He is going, I believe, to Ohio State, which I love Ohio State. So I think that is a great call. A lot of stuff for music and whatnot. And so he will be back on at 10:15. We're going to be talking about Deandre Hopkins. We're going to be talking about different metrics that we like to utilize when we're analyzing players. And then last but definitely not least, if we have some time, might even be talking a little bit of Scott Fishbowl. Before that, I will be doing my typical answer trade. So get all your trades ready. If you got startup questions, things like that, that is your time to get in here. My hair, my voice. I thought my hair looked just like John Lynch. Although I guess it kind of sound like or look like John Lynch, but my voice, I'm gonna have to check that out, because there was somebody else that said that the other day, that my voice sounds like John Lynch. So I'm gonna have to check out some of his interviews and see if it in fact does. But Josh, thank you. I appreciate it. I literally got my haircut today, but I'm bearing the lead because Andrew Cooper is going to be joining us here literally in minutes. And in fact, it sounds like he's ready to go. So at any time we can bring him on. Here he is, the man himself, Andrew Cooper. Andrew, how's it going, buddy?
What's up, dude? I had my screen off for a second there, and I could have sworn I heard John Lynch.
Right?
Did he leave, or where did
he
go?
left? I interviewed him real quickly. I wanted to ask him some things about Trey Lance. But he's gone now.
Excellent voice. I love his voice, dude. Anybody that sounds like him, angelic voice. So glad to be with you, buddy.
Hey, so I'm really excited because we got to work together a little bit during the NFL draft. But other than that, I don't think we've gotten to do anything together before.
No, but that's the crazy. This is a big community. The thing is, I've seen your work. You know what I mean? We follow each other. I see your tweets. So it's like finally getting a chance to get on here and really chop it up, because the draft was a blast. But how hectic was that?
Oh,
you know what
it
I mean?
was
The trades and popping in and out. I mean, I will say Matt Deutsch, he knows how to produce a show, right? He had the fireworks coming from all angles, but we get to settle down and actually talk now for real, right?
Exactly. No, that was a fun night. And you're right. We had people popping in and out like it was like some ESPN set or something. Like it was pretty impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, he knows what he's doing, man. Man of the people.
He does. So I'm a guy that loves revisionist history. I love to like look back on things. I love to look back at old drafts. I love to look and see what I got right, what I got wrong, what the community got right, what the community got wrong. So I thought it would be fun to have you on and look back at these last 3 rookie classes from a fantasy football angle. And I'm curious because some of these I love to pat myself on the back for, because I did fantastic. Other ones I'm like wanting to bury my head, because why did I fall for the trap of this player? I think we all have that, right?
Oh, dude, I have the thing is, like, we all like to think we're like this like rational, reasonable, guy that has all the answers. But like I look back and there's a number of traps I fell for, and it's so much easier to look back and be like, oh yeah, I dodged this one. Tutu Atwell. Of course, I don't have any.
course.
But I can't wait to get into because there are a bunch. And there's a few of them where I'll still continue to fight the good fight. Like I've got some uphill battles I'd like to talk about here today. So this should be a fun one, buddy.
For sure, for sure. So let's go back. I'm gonna let's start with the 2020 draft. Okay, so we're not gonna go back too crazy far. We're gonna look at 2020, 2021, and 2022. Let's start with the biggest debate, and this is one of the ones. Now, there were a couple players in this class I'm gonna have to like be embarrassed about. But starting at the top, I got this part right. Right away from the top, the debate as soon as the NFL draft happened was Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Jonathan Taylor. Now, on our own show, normally myself, Matt, and Rich, normally we see pretty eye to eye on things. We disagree on some stuff, but we typically see pretty eye to eye. This was one of the ones where we were split. And I was by myself on the Jonathan Taylor Island, all alone. And I remember, especially after that first game, they just let me have it. They just let me have it over how could I not pick a running back in that Chiefs system with Patrick Mahomes. So where were you at in the Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Taylor debate?
Yeah, so this one for me. You can go back and check my post history, Twitter, Reddit. I went back to check myself just to be sure, and I had the ultimate cop out take at the time, which is just such a. Are you ready for this? Is the garbage take I had, which was CEH in full PPR, JT in half and standard. So I just kind of split them up. I was like, I'm not dealing with this. I got other stuff to do. In recent years, I've gotten more into Dynasty. That was kind of like my first foray into doing it, but I've mostly been a redraft guy for a long time. So like at the time I was just like, hey, this is what I'm doing. And I did take CEH in a full PPR league. I took Jonathan Taylor in a half PPR league. So I walked.
So you stuck with it at least.
I stuck with it, but it's just, and I mean, technically, Jonathan Taylor hasn't been an amazing pass catcher, but at the end of the day, the reality is we need to draft the best players. Right, we need to analyze these players individually of situation, right? And a lot of people learn that mistake with guys like AJ Brown, where how many people were fading the location, right? Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's going to sort itself, right? So that was one where I fell for that there. And the reality of the situation, though, looking back, is not necessarily, if you really think about it, CEH was a first round pick, but the difference between CEH and Swift and JT was what, 5, 6, 7 picks? Like it wasn't really that much. So you should have just been going with the guy you liked most. So I did fall for that hype to a certain degree. The Patrick Mahomes handpicked him, right? That was what everyone was saying, right? The old handpicked. Yeah. So that was one where I did buy into it a bit, and it's hard not to, really.
It was really difficult because that looked like that prime. Remember all the Brian Westbrook comps that we were hearing about CEH.
Exactly. And for that, Andy Reid, he's the bright, that's his guy. So, and the thing is, like, at least you can sit back and say, well, Patrick Mahomes is wrong. Right? Like
not him, not me.
Not me. He was wrong, right? I was just following him. I was trailing him. But yeah, so I was split on that. That was my take on that one.
No, and I think this has now kind of become the poster child exactly for what you said of taking the best player, the highest ranked player. And honestly, like looking back, I wish I would have stuck with my board even more because going into the process, CH, I had him as like running back 4 or 5. Now I bumped him up to 2. So even like I'm not like fully absolved of like all blame.
But it's so hard, man. It's so hard to stick with those guns, bro. So I give you that. And the thing is, I will say this. My opinion is that anyone that doesn't change their rankings after the draft, which I've seen, like you can just throw those rankings out. You have to factor in the draft, right?
Absolutely.
But it's so hard to face that peer pressure. And it's like, especially with rookies where we got to be honest that it's a percentage game, no matter what, right?
Yeah.
You never know who's going to be a Monty Ball that just has these off-field issues that no one, if the team doesn't know about, how am I supposed to know he's got these issues? How am I supposed to know that who was the tight end that the Jets had for a bit there? Like, how am I supposed to know these guys have these off-field issues
Herndon?
that we? No, the other before him now. Now I'm blanking on it, but he had alcohol issues, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, how am I supposed to know? So it's like things like that where, to a certain degree, it's out of our control.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is out of our control. But I think what happened for me in that process, because that was fairly early on for me as far as analyzing rookies and doing it from a platform. That was only my second class. 2019 was my first class doing it. 2020 was my second class. But kind of what I learned in there is unless somebody gets radically different draft capital than I expect, I'm talking like rounds different than what I expect, then I need to keep players in their same tier. Can I move them up and down a little bit in that tier? Yeah, I'm going to move them up and down a little bit in that tier. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire should have never gotten higher than like 3 or 4 if I would have done that. He would have stayed a little bit lower. Different players at different times would have stayed within that same tier. So I think that's the thing where that's what shifted for me is they will move. They're going to move post-draft. But moving them up 7-8 spots, that's where we can really fall in love with those landing spots a little too much.
Exactly. My process is, so I don't play Devy. Do you play Devy at all?
I do.
Yeah. So I don't play Devy, so I don't do Devy ranking. So my process is there's 3 parts, right? There's college production, and that to me includes both stats and film. So that's part 1. Part 2 is the part 2 is essentially metrics, right? And a lot of that is like workout metrics, combine, size, speed, important stuff. And then part 3 is, to me, is draft data. And it's not to me just draft capital. Landing spot's part of it. Draft narrative is part of it. Did they trade up for this guy? How many split ends were taken before this particular split end went? Right? Like,
sure.
So I include all that. Like, those are the 3 parts for me. So when I do my rankings, include all that. But you're right. You shouldn't move too far away from your preconceived notions unless it's drastic, right?
Right.
The biggest example to me was the 2019 first year you said you were doing it. Hakeem Butler.
Yeah.
There were a lot of people that had him top 1, 2, 3 and did not move him when he went in the 4th round. That's one example of like you can't ignore it, right? You can't ignore that big of a difference. But if we're talking about this class, right? And this is the Michael Pittman and
T. Higgins.
Justin Jefferson. So when Michael Pittman and T. Higgins go back to back, whoever you liked first is the guy you should have first. Like, just because one guy goes 1 spot higher, do not change your rankings, right?
Right. So I've looked at a few different ones, and we'll look at different ones in this process. Right now, I'm looking at what PFF had as like their rankings in 2020 for these guys. So we had Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 1, Jonathan Taylor at 2. I'll read you the top 12. All right, and then we can break it down. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Jonathan Taylor at 3, Cam Akers, 4, DeAndre Swift, 5, Jerry Jeudy, 6, Keyshawn Vaughn, 7, J.K. Dobbins, 8, CeeDee Lamb, 9, Henry Ruggs, 10, Justin Jefferson, 11, Joe Burrow, and then 12, Jalen Reagor. So looking at this, I was a Jalen Reagor guy. I was. And I had him above Justin Jefferson, which now sounds like the most idiotic thing possible. But I wasn't alone there. There were a lot of people that were really in on Jalen Reagor.
In hindsight, like for me personally, of that crew, the only guy that I plucked out of that first round and moved him down was Ruggs. Like, obviously, I didn't know what was going to happen with him. I just felt he was more of a field stretcher type player. And most of my leagues I don't play in any standard leagues. I just don't. So, like, I have one best ball dynasty league where, sure, give me guys like that, right? But
sure.
For the most part, that was my thought process. But no, I'm with you, man. Like, I think I had Reagor ahead of JJ as well. And in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense. But like, nobody knew. If everyone knew that JJ was going to be a generational talent, then he would have gone ahead of CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy and Ruggs and all these guys. He was a 5th wide receiver off the board. You know what I mean? So it's hard to say. When I hear those rankings from PFF, the name that sticks out to me is Cam Akers, because Akers was not going there, even in ADP. Like,
he wasn't.
Yeah, that's high for him. And I had no problem with Akers. Obviously, we'll never know really because he suffered the Achilles, but I just think like it's interesting. I would like to know what the thought process was to put him ahead of Swift and Jay Swift at least.
Right, right. And yeah, and J.K. Dobbins. And, Keyshawn Vaughn's the other interesting one. I was a fan of Vaughn up until I went to the combine and I actually got a chance to like talk with him. And I was like, this guy's a jerk. Like, I don't know. Like, that shouldn't affect my rankings that he's a jerk, but it kind of does. And so it was kind of interesting because I liked his tape going into the process. But you always wonder too when they're an older player, fifth year guy at running back, it's always a little bit interesting. But even though I was higher on him, 6 seems really high too. Like I remember him going in the first round, like 8, 9, that range, 10. I was comfortable him around the turn. So like 112, 2-1, like that's where I was comfortable with him then. But then, looking back, obviously even that was well too high. I think one of the big stories here.
I want to talk. Can we talk Keyshawn Vaughn real quick?
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
That's when I want to say that I fell for the trap. In one of my leagues, I needed a running back. I did the thing you're not supposed to do. Drafted for need, went for him as a running back. Thought he was going to be the James White to Tom Brady. For Tom Brady,
Sure.
right? So I was like in on that. And the year before that, I had plans to do the same thing and got sniped. Luckily, I did get sniped because it was Justice Hill the year before that I want. Now I was like, this is the guy, the pass catching back. Somebody else sniped me, and I was like, all right, like I got bailed out there. But it's interesting that you mentioned that he has an attitude problem because he went to the spot that had the coach at the time that was known for those issues, right? So Bruce Arians, going back to the time in Arizona, not sure if you remember, he cut a guy for parking in the wrong parking spot.
I
And
do not remember that.
he cut a dude for parking the wrong parking spot. So when he was with the Cardinals, there were a number of instances where I was like, this guy is, dude, do not get in his bad side. He cut a guy for parking the wrong parking spot. He came out and said, don't get hurt because you won't make the team.
I remember that one.
Like, don't get hurt. And then he also came out and said, we have 2 wide receivers on the team. At the time, they had probably 11 wide receivers on the depth chart. He goes, we got 2 wide receivers on the team. He goes, Larry and Smoke. And it was Larry Fitzgerald and John Brown, Smokey Brown. And just said that to the media. Like right now, we only got 2 wide receivers. So looking back, Keyshawn Vaughn comes in, as you say, bad attitude,
right.
gets COVID immediately with a coach that is going to blame that on you and gets buried under the doghouse immediately. Like, I wish I had known you at the time, man, because I could have used that advice. Right.
So looking into the second round, there were so many second round gems in this class. And I saw a lot of these guys go in the second round. Now, there were also some hilarious pitfalls in this class as well. But 13, we had Zach Moss. 14, Brandon Ayuk. 15, Michael Pittman Jr. 16, AJ Dillon. Now, this is the guy's ranks. This isn't necessarily ADP. This was PFF's ranks. AJ Dillon at 16. Tua at 17 and 1 quarterback. T. Higgins all the way down at 18.
Crazy talk.
Crazy that he was that low. Yeah, I loved T and Michael Pittman, but I unfortunately also loved Jalen Reagor and wasn't as high on Justin Jefferson as I should have been. So, we win some, we lose some. 19, Denzel Mims. 20, Anthony McFarland. 21, Laviska Shenault. 22, Justin Herbert. 23, KJ Hamler. And 24, Brian Edwards. So, few names in there that are interesting.
I'll give you one that jumps to me right away, which is this was a guy that I liked pre-draft process. And I am known throughout, like people that know me know that I am very big on draft capital and what happens in the draft. I liked Denzel Mims going into the draft. I did too. And then when I saw the narrative, so this is where narrative goes in, right? Where I looked at the teams and I'm like, okay, these teams have a lot of smaller wide receivers. They need a big split end to tether his foot to the line and play on the outside, right? It's a different role, right? What DK Metcalf does is very different than what DK Metcalf, Mike Evans, very different than what Chris Godwin and Tyler Lockett, these guys do. Right. So I looked at it and I was like, okay, let's see. There's so many teams that could use these big guys. And I'm like, who's going to get taken? Right. And then T. Higgins and Michael Pittman both go bang, bang, Colts, Bengals. I'm like, okay, that's where I wanted Mims to go. He didn't go there. And then the Steelers take Chase Claypool. And that was the dagger for me where I was like, I just had to take Mims and I had to take Brian Edwards and move him down because that was the group of guys where it's like they're competing to be the same guy, you know?
Right.
So that's where I did have to. So I avoided my own bias on Mims where I liked the player, but just with what happened, I had to move. I moved up Ayuk and Pittman and even Claypool. I do have some Claypool. So
Yeah.
But yeah, I couldn't do it. I couldn't go down there and do it.
For me, this was the class where I did very well overall at running back, and I didn't do nearly as well at wide receiver because the first guy off the board, Zach Moss, I was avoiding like the plague. Like I was watching him, you know, look, we can, and one of my favorite things to do is I love to get my hands on the all-22 because I really feel like you do not have a good feel for vision and burst unless you get that angle. Because first of all, looking at the different blocking schemes, gap scheme versus zone scheme versus man's, like you can't really tell if a player has good vision unless you can see what the line's doing. And from the broadcast angle, it's really hard to see certain things and where the holes really opened up. Was that the designed hole? Did he bounce? Like you can't really get a good feel for some of that kind of stuff. And so watching Zach Moss, I was like, his vision's pretty good, but man, there's no burst. He's not hitting these holes at the velocity that I would like to see. And so that was one of those things for me where Zach Moss moved way down my board, even though, yeah, he had some power and he had some decent hands. I just didn't know if he had the juice to be an NFL running back.
Right. Because those vision guys, they don't have to have like top end speed. They have to have that get through, right?
Yes.
They have to break through the tissue paper, like Le'Veon Bell and Arian Foster. Those guys, not necessarily fast, but they could stretch it out. And when it was time to go, they went, you know?
Right.
So yeah, that's a crazy thing with a lot of these guys. The same with tight end, I run into that problem too, where some of these guys with the schemes, like Schoonmaker, like he comes out and I'm like, it's all RPOs, it's all play action. The guy has 0 broken tackles. I don't even know. I have no idea if this guy can make a contested catch because we don't see the scheme.
We just didn't see it.
Right. And that's where draft capital, I think, to a certain degree comes in. But great job, Dodge and Zach Moss. I didn't have a pick where I wasn't opposed to him. I'm looking back at my rankings. I wasn't really opposed to him. I shouldn't really have a pick where I could take him. I will tell you one thing from this draft that I did do in my biggest hometown league that to this day, people were at the draft. People were like, "What are you doing?" And they were like, a couple of people were pissed. I double tapped, and this was in single QB. I took Tua, and then I traded up and took Jalen Hurts too.
Did you really?
And I had one Q. I had Stafford. My QBs were Matt Stafford and Matt Ryan. And I'm like,
okay, so you knew the time was coming.
I was like, these Matts are getting old, baby. So I was like, you know what? I don't know. You know, I was like, obviously, I'm taking Tua first because one guy got shipped out, but I was like, I still like this other guy too. So I did that, and they were like, "What?" Like other guys needed QBs. Like, what are you doing, dude? And I was like, I don't know, But that one panned out well.
That panned out beautifully.
Now those are my 2 quarterbacks because Ryan's pretty much toast, and I don't know what's going on with Stafford. So that one was a win. The big loss for me was Keyshawn Vaughn. Man, that one hurt. That one hurt bad. I also have I'm looking at this ADP. I fell for the Laviska Shenault could be the next Devo Samuel. That's so stupid, dude.
Oh man.
And I want to point out in the comments, can you pull up just Josh's? I don't know if you do on your show, pull up the comments, but just Josh saying I'm a Raiders fan and was hyped over Ruggs. Got him as much as I could. That draft was brutal for the Raiders because Ruggs obviously went to jail. Brian Edwards, terrible. And Lynn Bowden, also drafted in the 3rd round, was traded to the Dolphins. That was just a brutally bad draft for the Raiders team.
They had so many drafts in a row. I think Arnett was their 1st round pick that year as well.
Yeah, oh man, that was that year.
That was the same. That's
one of the worst drafts all time, bro.
Like goated as a terrible draft.
Gruden, dude.
Terrible. All right. So let's move on to 2021.
Yeah.
And this one, for some reason, I didn't realize it until this moment that I only have the top 12 on this one. But still, there's a lot of information we can glean from the top 12 and talk about the players that we didn't get in the top 12 here. So Jamar Chase, first one off the board here, ranking wise. Najee Harris, second one off the board. Javonte Williams, Kyle Pitts, Travis Etienne, Devontae Smith, Rashad Bateman, Jalen Waddle, Elijah Moore, Rondale Moore, Terrace Marshall, Trey Lance. So those were the ranked top 12 guys, which overall that aged pretty well so far, I would say. Who in this class were your guys that you were really in on?
So I was in on, and this is what's crazy is that, as you know, that I do a ton of tight end work. Like that's like my main focus. That's my jam. And I am the one that always pours cold water on the rookie tight ends. Because you need a unique combination of talent, scheme, and opportunity to get any tight end upside, right? So even as a rookie, it's brutal. But I was in on Pitts. I still truly believe in Pitts. Like one of the few guys I would draft in the first round. This year I would draft Kincaid, and I like Laporta too. But I'll tell you, it's very rare. I went like 5, 6, 7 years saying I'm not drafting any of these guys. I don't care in the first round, you know. So I was in on Pitts. Everybody was in on Chase.
Yeah.
I will say that I'd say the one miss in the name that you didn't bring up because he wasn't really even going that high is that I was willing to give Zach Wilson a chance.
Sure.
Because my philosophy a lot of times, like obviously we want to run out to best case scenario with rushing upside. But my philosophy most times is they need to be a starting caliber NFL player. So like Trevor Lawrence to me was my QB1. And I know some people had Lance there for the rushing upside, but for me, I was like Lawrence. I think this guy, I've seen this guy make throws that are insane. Like the throws he would make running to his left, where he would torque his body and throw absolute like seeds down the sideline.
Yeah.
That's stuff that he was making like crazy high level throws. So like that kind of guy I knew would be the guy, but I was like, you know what? I think Zach Wilson going second overall, he's the best chance to be the guy. I had him as my QB2, which no one did, and that proved to be wrong. So, you know,
I was part of the Justin Fields hive that was like, he might be better than Lawrence. Now, for a minute there, I looked like an idiot because it was looking really bad in Chicago. Things are starting to play out a little better now, so I don't look quite as dumb. But Sedated Fork says, I thought you had Devonta Smith top overall that year. And that's true. I did have Devonta Smith as not my top overall player, but I did have him as wide receiver 1. I had Chase as wide receiver 2. Now, looking back, Chase was obviously the number 1 guy, but Smith has proved himself to be an amazing wide receiver as well.
He's
so
great,
it's not like
man.
he's a dud.
Right. Like that was the thing is like I just posted a meme the other day about like the whole argument on the BMI and all that. It's
Sure.
like I if it's height and weight that's the issue. Yes, like of course. But if like size is the problem, that you can bulk up. Like Austin Eckler, if you remember when he was drafted, he didn't look like Austin Eckler now. Austin Eckler now looks like a goddamn Ninja Turtle. Like you know what I mean? There's no chance he's still 100. He was 194 pounds when he was drafted. There's no chance he's under 200 now. Like he's yoked, right? Like he put in the work. So if that was the problem, then you put on the weight. And he's a Fred Biletnikoff winner, right? Like this is a guy that, he's going to be one of those guys. I had Chase 1, just,
and I think that was like common. I think that was the normal thought. But
I will say this though, just as a side, I was in the camp that they should have drafted Penei Sewell instead of
the offensive lineman, yes.
Which jury's out. Who knows? Neither of those teams have won a Super Bowl yet. Just saying. But I was like, you know what? If you're building from like within, like this should be the way. Like this is the way. But hey, you know what? Look, they're going to be just fine. I think.
Absolutely. So, on here, this was apparently I just felt like a contrarian this year because I also didn't have Najee as the top running back. I had Javonte Williams as the top running back in this class, which was looking good until the injury. We'll have to see how things play out. Najee obviously had a fantastic rookie season, but a lot of it was volume based. A lot of it was checkdowns from Ben Roethlisberger. Came back down to earth quite a bit this past year. We'll kind of have to wait and see on that. Jury is still out there.
I'll say one thing on Najee is like the landing spot situation with him. That you have to factor in landing spot with a guy that age in that position, because if they want to pick up the 5th-year option, right, he'll be 27 when he walks on that team. And if they wanted franchise tag him, be 28 or 29, it's like they have him on like an indentured servitude level contract. So you like, and if Kenny Pickett's not the guy, could be a lot of pain. So just
no, it absolutely could be. We'll see. One of their biggest issues was their offensive line. So they've finally done some things to invest in that offensive line. So you're hoping that helps, but we will have to wait and see. So Mr. Scampers over here said, did someone say Amon-Ra St. Brown? We did not, because he did not make the top 12 in this. He did not make the top 12 almost anywhere, but I was pounding the table for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I remember I had him, I want to say as wide receiver 6 in this class. I had him ahead of Terrence Marshall, who's on this list. I had him ahead of a couple other guys. And man, if you remember the start of that year, he was non-existent. Like he was nowhere to be found the first like 8 weeks of the season. And then the second half of the season, Amon-Ra came out and just went nuts, like absolutely bonkers. Then there was kind of the debates was, is it because there was nobody else there? Hawkinson was hurt, Swift was hurt, all that stuff. Or is it because he's really that guy? Well,
it's because Ben Johnson was calling the plays too. They switched it up too.
That's true. But we see now he's that guy.
I'll tell you right now, I don't know if he is.
You don't think he is?
So here's my take on
all right, let's hear it.
I was off him, right? And still I look at his ADOT, 7 yards as rookie, 6.9 his second year. I like Jalen Waddle at the 7-yard ADOT as rookie. He became a full-time flanker, and that went to 12. My concern for Amon-Ra long term, and this year he should be fine again, obviously. But my concern is that his career trajectory is going to look more like Tyler Boyd than it's going to look like the guys that hit the age apex at age 27 and blow up and go crazy. I worry that Tyler's like, if you look at Tyler Boyd's career, he had 148 targets in 2019, and then they brought in a split end and a flanker. This team already drafted a flanker in Jamison Williams.
Right.
What happens with some of these guys is if they bring in another guy, a split end, then he goes from being a guy that plays slot in 3 wide receiver sets and flanker in 2 wide receiver sets to a guy that plays slot and then comes out of the game. Tyler Boyd last year played 85% of his snaps at slot. Only Hunter Renfrow played a higher percentage of the guys that played like at least 300 snaps. And now he comes out of the game. It's a change in usage, and that's my concern. So, but it might not happen. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown might be Chris Godwin, where he plays, or Cooper Kupp, where he and
Keenan Allen.
The guy that drafted him is the guy that drafted Cooper Kupp, right? Or was the head scout for the Rams. Brad Holmes was the head scout for the Rams when they drafted Cooper Kupp. So it's within the range of outcomes. I'll admit that I'm already wrong on Amon-Ra St. Brown because I didn't like him as a rookie, and he's obviously whatever you paid for him, he's been worth it. That's my concern, though. That's my concern. But clearly, you having him at 6, he is easily at least wide receiver 6 in that class. Chase, I mean, I would like right now, I put Chase, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle ahead, but you can't put anybody else ahead right now.
Yeah, and honestly, even in ADP, Smith and Amon-Ra are like neck and neck. They are right there neck and neck. Now, I would also take Smith ahead of Amon-Ra, but they are right in the same range there. So let's move on to last year's class now.
Yeah, Amon-Ra or Waddle? Who do you take?
Waddle. I would take Waddle.
Okay, yeah. All right,
yep. All right, so let's go to 2022 now. This one's a little bit more difficult because they've only had that 1 year.
Right.
You want to see at least 2 before you really start making any sort of judgment on how these things pan out. But here's what we have here. Breece Hall as number 1, No shock. He was my number one. Was he your number one running back or
Yes.
number one player?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was very rare to see him not be number one overall whether it was super flex or not.
Yeah, and it's just the modern era, right? Like Scott Barrett did the homework of a target versus a carry and how even in standard leagues, a target is worth 1.4 times a carry, not a reception, a target. And in PPR, it's like 2.7, right? So like Brees Hall was, with his ability and his play style, he was just the guy, right?
Absolutely. So then after that, we have Drake London, Kenneth Walker, Garrett Wilson, Treylon Burks. At 6, we have Chris Olave, Jamison Williams, George Pickens, Damian Pierce, James Cook, Jahan Dotson, and Sky Moore round out that top 12. Now, this is once again rankings versus ADP. This guy hit on Pierce because Pierce ended up being, I don't remember him going that high. Do you remember him going at 9 overall?
No, well, it's got to be PFF, right?
Right. This time I went with Pro Football Networks.
Okay, so I was actually looking earlier at I was looking at Pro Fantasy Calculator, and Pierce was the first pick in the second round. So
yeah, and that sounds about right. I remember him being right around the turn there was where he was going. But here, most of this first round so far has played out pretty well. The only one that I would say that there's some real concern about would be Sky Moore at 12, and there's still hope there. It's not a done deal that Sky Moore can't be their top receiver, but the rest of the first round played out pretty well.
Yeah, so far it's looking pretty good. And yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anybody I was really fading there.
I was not a big Treylon Burks guy.
Yeah, so I was in on him. I mean, if Britt Flynn never heard me say I was out on Treylon Burks, she would be jumping into this stream. I know she has access to these airwaves because she's a Arkansas truther. Yeah, she's Arkansas diehard, and
right.
I like the idea. So let me ask. I imagine if you were out on Treylon Burks, you're probably out on Jonathan Mingo this year.
I actually liked Mingo more than I liked Burks. Here were my concerns about Burks. I was worried because one, his utilization at Arkansas was weird because he wasn't somebody with a quick first step. He was somebody that had more long speed, but not necessarily short area quickness. And so them constantly using him on screens and things like that was always baffling to me because that wasn't where he succeeded. I was worried about his lack of route diversity. And then I was worried about watching him at the combine because he looked out of shape. He looked like somebody that wasn't ready, that wasn't prepared. And then we heard about some of the asthma stuff and all that came out afterwards. So there was a lot of those things that when I have to decide between Garrett Wilson, who is an elite tactician, when I have to decide between Drake London, who's got the size, got the separation ability, go up and get it. Like when I'm deciding between these types of players, he just moved down my board a lot because there were some things that I didn't think he offered that these other receivers do. Now, that being said, I have come around a little bit this year. I think from all the reports I'm hearing, he's, in the best shape of his life. We hear that a lot, but, he actually stayed in Tennessee, worked out there, all that kind of stuff. And
that's important though. That's important because I'll give you the flip side example, right? Because you talk about like a guy that it always concerns you when you see these guys getting the screens and getting the end arounds and stuff and the manufactured touches, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you worry that they can't create for themselves. And the opposite example of what you're talking about is Tavon Austin. If you remember, he was getting the manufactured touches and he came out and told the media after year one, the playbook looked like Spanish to me, right? And then he didn't put in the work and he ended up being the guy he ended up being. So I think it is important when you hear things like, oh, this guy actually cares and he's hanging around and he's doing the right things. So I think that is important. And to your point on Burks, this happens to a lot of us where like, it's not a matter of you necessarily hating him. It's just you like other guys better. And when you're forced to do linear rankings, it makes it seem like you dislike some of these guys when it's not necessarily the case, right?
Exactly. And then one other guy that I had him ahead of, and I'm still a really big fan of this player. We're talking about hands that are just fantastic, making the spectacular catch. And he's kind of like an afterthought in this class, but I love Jahan Dotson, and I still
Yes.
do.
Yes, man. All that boy does is score touchdowns, right? And there's something to be said for that though, because there's guys that don't, some people call it pushing off, some people call it body positioning, right? But I'll tell you what, who used to push off all the damn time? Jerry Rice, Jordy Nelson, right? I have a take. I feel like Julio Jones was too stand up of a guy to ever push off. He would have scored more touchdowns if he started pushing off a little bit. You know what
I
I mean?
totally agree. I think we would have seen easily 25% increase in touchdowns.
I just, hey, you know what? Go out and get yourself an offensive pass interference one time, Julio. Come on, test the boundaries, right?
Right.
Especially later on when you get that license, like Deandre Hopkins, he's making these plays, but it's body positioning. And guy like Jahan Dotson, man, I'm loving what I'm seeing. We just need the Ron Rivera, Curtis Samuel infatuation. We just need that to go away, dude. No more carry, no more, right? Like, let's two-man show, right? That's what I want.
McLaurin and Dotson would make me a happy man.
McLaurin and Dotson, I want what they have, and give me the 49ers and Miami offense. McLaurin and Dotson, and a fullback playing like 50% of the snaps, right? And just one tight end that's exactly what blocking tight ends, bring them on. Just consolidate those targets, right? Let's go.
Love it. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on, revisiting these rookie classes with us. Tell everybody where they can find you, what you're working on. I know you're on these airways all the time. Tell the folks about it.
Yeah, I'm on here all the time, sporadically, but as we get close to football season, I've been talking to our buddy Matt Deutsch, Garrett, and I think us football guys are going to have to take over. Sorry, obviously Moose and Keith are always going to have their place talking about the Knicks, even though they've been eliminated for 2 weeks, a month now, right? So we're taking over, man. We're going to have a ton on Better Sports. And if you want my articles, if you want my in-depth stuff, my videos, first of all, just follow me at Coupe Fiasco. I retweet everything. But go to fantasyalarm.com, subscribe to the Fantasy Alarm YouTube. Every take I have, I boil it down into article form, and that's how I absorb things. So all these takes that come out that are here, that's because I've done the research. I sat down. We do the work, Garrett. That's the difference, between guys that are just like saying whatever. So if you want to just take the shortcut to everything I know, that's on fantasyalarm.com. And right now, you can become a member. 6 months at half price, promo code COOP at Fantasy Alarm.
Look at that, promo code COOP. Well, thanks for joining us, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Anytime, seriously.
Sweet, we'll have you on again soon. Cool. All right, guys. Well, we are going to take a quick break, but get all of those trade questions, get all those startup draft questions, get all those ready, because that's what we're going to be doing next. We're going to be getting your questions, answering what you want to know. We'll be back in a moment.
What can we expect from you out there on the track tonight?
Listen, I have a wife, 2 kids. I have, full-time jobs. I'm never nervous. I don't even know what that word means. Can you explain what nervous means? No. I'm ready to have fun. I've never done anything like this before. I got asked to be a part of this. This is fascinating. Like, it's so cool to just look around and see what goes on here. So I'm just excited to get out on the horse. And you want trash talk? Is that what you're asking me for? No trash talk. I hope everyone does well.
All right. Everyone's going to do well, but it has to be a winner. So give me your trifecta. Who's going to come in first, second, and third? Your heat.
I will go Maria 1, me 2, Willie 3, Moose goes 4th.
Well, it's very simple. I won this event last year. I won my heat, and so the defending champ has to be the favorite. Now, that makes me a little nervous just because I feel like it's hard to repeat. There's a little pressure when you're the favorite, but that being said, I'm still optimistic.
So your heat, it's you,
yes.
Moose and Keith from Better Sports Network, and Willie Colon.
I think Keith might be my stiffest competition, and I asked for this because I actually recruited Keith, if you didn't know. So Keith, if you win, you're welcome.
Malusis is very good. I mean, he knows what he's doing. But I'm going to go with Maria.
Keith is waving to the crowd. He must pay attention because they're off. It's Mark Malusis going for the lead. Maria Marino on the outside, and now Keith Irizarry on the outside with speed, and they're 3 wide into the first turn. Woo! Mark Malusis is locked in for his life. 138 and 2. They're into the stretch. Sportscasters Derby 2. And still in front, Keith Irizarry. And now Mark Malusis is trying to squeeze on through.
Come on! Come on! Let's go! Come on, dig it! Yeah!
Keith Irizarry. Keith, you did it all the way, wire to wire. Over Mark Malusis.
Awesome! That was so cool!
The champ is here! Keith, what was it like being out there? Adrenaline rush, you were doing the Instagram Live, so there was no panic. You looked cool, calm, collected the whole time, and you won it.
I felt really comfortable. I did. Like, I know you were joking with me before. Are you nervous? Are you whatever? What are you? David, the driver, was awesome. He's like, we're going to win this. I said, all right, let's win this. And he said, let's go. Yeah, I just felt really comfortable. I did. It was fun. We're in the lead. I got Maria Marino on the right side of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she's going to beat us, right? And then out of nowhere, you see Moose coming up this way, and we feel him breathing down our neck. And I'm like,
Moose
no,
on the loose. Watch out.
Moose was definitely on the loose, and we just got Moose by a neck, a nose, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, but again, all of this for a great cause, and it was absolutely awesome to do this. It was cool.
All right, Keith, congratulations, and no matter what, you could always hold this over Moose's head.
Yeah!
Thank you so much to Andrew Cooper for joining us. Awesome segment getting to revisit these running backs, these wide receivers, these tight ends from days of old. And honestly, I wish we would have had more time because I want to maybe even we'll see how things go with the trade questions and whatnot. But I want to keep talking about some of this because I think it's very interesting. But before we get to that, Fantasy Alarm All Sports subscription. Get all pro access to Fantasy Alarm for the award-winning DFS playbook, covering 10 different sports. That's right, 10 different sports. Fantasy football and NFL betting included, plus tools, podcast, Discord chat, all kinds of stuff. For a limited time, get all this for 50% off your first 6 months with promo code ALARM50. That's ALARM50 at fantasyalarm.com. Start your free trial today. All right. Oh, and even with that, if you use Fantasy Alarm, use promo code Fantasy Alarm at underdog.com, you're going to get a $100 promo code. That's right. Matching up to $100 on Underdog. Heavy T, I got you. I literally just saw that. Look at that. Great minds. Great minds think alike there. All right. Get your trade questions in. Get your startup draft questions in. Rookies, whatever you want to talk about, get those questions in because this is the time that we can get to that because in not too long, we got my boy Dennis Bennett hopping on. So he will be on very, very soon. One other thing I want to touch on before we get to all of that, the Dynasty Nerds app. That's right. 2.0, Dynasty Nerds 2.0 just launched. And now Dynasty Nerds, the GM, the trade calculator, the trade finder, all that kind of stuff is now on an app. It's the first one like it. And look, I don't even know if I can show you everything well, but here it is. You can see. No, you can't really see it. How well can you see that? Sort of. All right. You can see like all of these teams that I have, which ones are good, which ones aren't, all that kind of stuff. It analyzes your team, all the other teams in your league. Look, if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football, and chances are, if you're listening to this show, you do play Dynasty Fantasy Football, it is invaluable. I literally during the season and in the offseason, but specifically during the season, I use it daily. I'm looking at trades. I'm looking at where teams are strong, where teams are weak. I'm using the trade calculator. I'm using the trade finder to see comparable trades, what guys are going for. Like, all of that is so valuable. And every time it updates, I'm always trying to see, okay, where am I at contender mode versus dynasty mode? Because those are two different things. If you play dynasty, you understand the difference of when you're a contender and when you're not. So how you value your team should look a little differently when you're a contender that could win it all and when you're a team that might not be able to win it all. So those things are a little bit different. So we want to make sure that we check on those things, and you can do that on the Dynasty Nerds app. So go to the App Store, iOS. It's coming out for Android soon. It's not quite there. I apologize to all my Android friends, but it will be there soon. So let's go back talking about some of these players and some of these past draft classes, because there were some other things that I wanted to talk about with Andrew, but we ran out of time. I didn't want to keep him on too long. But this past year, we don't really have quite enough data yet to really say if they were hits or if they were misses. But we are able to kind of say these guys fell a little too far, and maybe these guys aren't going to pan out like we thought they were. Now, one of the biggest ones, and after the NFL draft, we didn't see him go first round quite as much, but right on that fringe there, Isaiah Spiller. This was somebody that was being talked about as the top overall running back in the class. And man, has he fallen far from grace. Now, it's not done. And in fact, I'm still willing to acquire him because he's being drafted in like the 20th round of startups. And anytime that there's a chance that you could get a good role on a good offense, I'm still interested at that price tag. So I'm still interested in Isaiah Spiller, but man, have we seen him fall far from grace in just a little bit over a year. I mean, my goodness, plummeted down dynasty boards. Other players that really fell, David Bell. I can honestly say I was never a David Bell guy. Now, that's partly because he was more of a analytics darling, and I'm more of a film guy. And watching him on film, he was always greatly disappointing to me. Player that couldn't really separate, couldn't really get above the defense, play above the rim, so to speak. I was really disappointed in David Bell. And then my Cleveland Browns drafted him, and that only added fuel to the fire because people were talking about there needs to be another receiver to catch passes from Deshaun Watson. So it only added even more fuel to the fire. But look, I missed that one, fortunately. I didn't miss the Sky Moore one, though. I'm still holding out hope. How many of you guys out there are still holding out hope in Sky Moore, or are you done with him? Do you think he's dead? Because I'm still holding out hope that he could end up being a thing. I still think he could end up even being the number one wide receiver for this Kansas City Chiefs. Now, Deandre Hopkins could have something to say about that. And, we will be talking Deandre Hopkins here in a little bit when we get Mr. Dennis Bennett here on the mic. But are you still drafting him or not? Because I still am. We're talking about somebody that had to make a big jump. He was originally a non-Power 5 guy, gets drafted as a junior. So we don't typically see that. Only their third year out, non-Power 5 school. That doesn't happen very often. I'm still holding out hope. I really liked his tape. Look, if you want to be done, I get it. But this is something that we've typically seen from the Kansas City Chiefs. Those younger guys in their first year, it takes them a little bit to get acclimated to the offense, to understand all the nuances. And we even saw Sky Moore catch a touchdown in the Super Bowl. So he's obviously not out of their plans. But if DeAndre Hopkins does come there, it greatly, greatly hurts his stock, because between him, Travis Kelce, there's only so many passes to go around. He's still going to be fighting with Tony, who could also be the top receiver on this team. So lots. Excuse me. Let me get a drink here. Lots to still see on Sky Moore. Going back to 2021, the guy that I never understood, I never got the hype, and I get it. He went to LSU and he was playing with Chase and Justin Jefferson, but Terrace Marshall. I never understood the Terrace Marshall love. I always thought that he was just a guy. He didn't do anything when he had the opportunity to be the guy for LSU. He was just okay. So that he was in the first round of startups was always greatly confusing to me. I never understood why he was going that high. But the other one in there that I did like a lot, and I guess I'm still holding out hope. I'm not giving up yet. But man, it has not looked as good as I would have hoped it would have. Rashad Bateman. Rashad Bateman had all of those skills that you wanted to see, with the exception of maybe not the fastest guy, but man, did he run good routes. He could play above the rim. He got separation. He had the production. He had the size. He had he checked all of those boxes. So when you have somebody that checks all those boxes, it was surprising to me to see him not perform very well. Now, injuries have had a lot to say about that, because in those first couple weeks of last season, he looked like he was becoming that player. He was becoming that guy. And let's see, where is his stats? Oh, that's not going to show me right here. But those first 2 weeks, he was putting up monster numbers with Lamar Jackson. And then the injury happened, and basically everything just fell apart for that offense. So I am still holding out hope on Rashad Bateman. Now, going all the way back to 2020, we didn't get to talk much about like the third round, but there were still even some really good names in the third round. Cole Kmet, Tyler Johnson, Eno Benjamin, Antonio Gibson. Antonio Gibson for a while was that guy. Now, last season, we kind of saw what happened. This past season, Brian Robinson joins the fray. So things just didn't really work out as well as people would have hoped for Antonio Gibson, but did have a good run there as a very fantasy relevant running back for the Washington football team at the time. Lynn Bowden Jr., LaMichael Pirine, my boy right here, DJ Dallas. I'll never stop loving him. DJ Dallas. Chase Claypool had a nice little run there. He was going quite a bit earlier. I don't remember him falling to the late third. I remember being end of the second round type of draft pick. So PFF had him quite a bit lower. Van Jefferson, Antonio Gandy Golden, Jordan Love, Darrington Evans, Jalen Hurts. So, I mean, like, there were still some very good names to be had later on in this draft class. Sedated Fork asks, Rondale Moore, any hope for him? Yeah, I think there is still hope for him. And he was another one that was playing well when healthy, but his biggest issue has been staying healthy. But now that we've seen DeAndre Hopkins depart, him and Hollywood Brown are going to be the main targets. Now, it'll be interesting to see who they deploy as their X receiver, because I don't think either one of those guys would benefit from being in that type of role. So whether it's Michael Wilson, a guy in the third round that they drafted just this year, or if it's somebody else, but I'm still waiting to see how that part is going to play out. But I do think Rondale Moore is going to be the second fiddle in that offense. We don't have Kyler Murray for the early part of the season, but even with some other quarterbacks, we've still seen him thrive, and he's going to play closer to the line of scrimmage. So even if it is Colt McCoy, who doesn't have the strongest deep arm, he is going to be looking for some of that closer to the line of scrimmage stuff. So I am still holding out hope for Rondale Moore. He is not dead to me at this point. We'll see. This is the year he's got to prove it, though. It's year 3. If you can't get it in those first 3 years, it's very, very rare to see a wide receiver break out after those first 3 years. So really hoping that he is able to do that this year. So we will wait and see. All right, let's take another commercial break here real quick. When we come back, we have a little bit of time left, so you got some time to get in some of those trades, some of those questions. But if not, I have a couple other surprises in store. We will see you in a moment.
Moose and Keith. Weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern.
The word genius is there. Bob Glover, it describes him. Bob, so when's the last time that Twitter defeated you? Because I've been defeated by Twitter today.
I'll tell you how Twitter defeated me one time. I had the mistaken impression that the year that Troy Polamalu won the Defensive Player of the Year, it looked like it was going to go to Clay Matthews Jr. And I tweeted it. And there was a guy on the media bus. He was like, oh, yeah, he's got it, a guy I trust. I won't tell you who it was, but his initials are Mike Garafolo. So I went with it. Got a DM from Rich Eisen, NFL Network. He goes, you sure about that? I go, oh, man. Oh, I just got this wave because like accuracy to me is really important. So I'm literally on the media bus. We're just getting back from media day. We are slipping and sliding in Dallas. It's snowing. I get off the bus. I open my laptop. I'm hunched over. And I just like literally people are passing me. Bob, what's wrong? And it was Polamalu and Adam Schefter had retweeted me. Trey Wingo had retweeted me. I'm like, oh, I'm dead.
So when it's Polamalu, then how do you handle that? Like, what was the subsequent tweet
I think
afterwards?
I said, got some bad Twitter info. I didn't put Garafalo's name on there. I had to
10 years later, you can out him. I like that. Yeah.
You know, he wouldn't mind that. He knows the stories. So.
Yeah.
He actually said to me, hey, Bob, I think you might have jumped the gun on that. I was like, oh, crap. There we go.
Campus to Canton on the Better Sports Network.
Would Dion bench Shador?
I don't think he would.
Like, how bad would it have to be? Because we've seen horrendous quarterback play from this Colorado team for the last, 5 years? JT Shroud, Brandon Lewis, just terrible quarterback play. Like, they were 131st, which is dead last in pass EPA per play. Obviously, it will be better, but how bad does it have to be for him to bench his own son? Like, I'm not sure he will ever either, like, especially with the attitude that he came in with.
If they don't get Rashada, who do they bench him for this year anyway? I don't know that there's another answer on that roster that you go to. They don't really have a guy behind him, so I don't even know if we would know the answer to that until the next year, assuming that, he doesn't declare for the draft, he returns, they bring somebody else that's competent and behind him.
If they're going to do this the Lincoln Riley way, next year would be the class to bring somebody in. Shador Sanders is going to be a third-year player, so he's going to play 2023. I don't think he's declaring for the 2024 NFL draft, so he's going to play in 2024 and then declare for the 2025 NFL draft. And let's remember this, he hasn't had a full recruiting cycle at Colorado. He will have that next recruiting cycle, so maybe he could get one of these class of 2024 quarterbacks there to come to Colorado.
However you're invested in sports, from betting to fantasy, collectibles, and more, join our community on Better Sports Network.
Welcome back, Dynasty Nerds. I am your host, Garret Price. If you missed our earlier segment with Andrew Cooper, you missed a great one. Fantastic talk about the 2020 rookie class, the 2021 rookie class, and the 2022 rookie class. Kind of looking back at a little bit of a revisionist history, looking back at what our misses were, what our hits were, what we would maybe do a little differently if we knew what we knew now. Great talk with him. Go check him out on Twitter at Coop A Fiasco. Awesome time with Coop. We also are going to be having Dennis Bennett joining us in about 15 minutes or so. He will be here. But before we do that, I want to tell you guys about Fantasy Alarm. So the Fantasy Football Best Ball ADP Risers article, Britt Flynn dropped that this morning. Really, really good article. If you haven't had a chance to go check it out, go check it out. But go look at her risers, her fallers. I think it's a really good article. And obviously, we always have some agreements and disagreements on players we like that are worth it, not worth it. Go there, fantasyalarm.com. Check out Britt Flynn's article on the best ball ADP risers and fallers, because I'm out there. I'm trying to get that $3 million from Underdog. So go out there, check it out, and maybe it'll even help you win some money there as well. Oh, Ryan McDowell. What's up, McDowell? Look, I got my Devi my Devi bids in today. So I got them in without you having to text me first. So I was very proud of that. It was a big moment for me. I'm in the one of these leagues here, the kitchen sink leagues with Ryan McDowell, and I always miss the notifications as to when different drafts are starting and things like that. And he's always texting me like, hey, forgot to nominate a player, but not this time. I was in it and on it. So good to see you, Ryan. Josh asks, what do you see from Elijah Moore this year? So Elijah Moore is a really interesting player. We talked about him. Well, actually, we didn't touch on him, but he was a part of that first round ADP from the 2021 class. And Moore was a player that I loved coming out of college. I mean, I loved watching his tape. Guy that just consistently got open, caught the ball, moved well in the open field, made things happen consistently. So big fan of Moore. We saw it at the end of his rookie year. I mean, he had a stretch there where he was a top 5 fantasy football player towards the end of the season there in 2021. But 2022, the wheels just kind of fell off, unfortunately, for him. Garrett Wilson was brought in, and he was brought in to be the guy. So that really hurt things. He didn't have a connection with the other quarterbacks. You could tell some of it was even getting his head. He was talking with the football, and it was a weird situation. He gets moved for good draft capital. The Browns used a 2nd-round pick and got back him and a 3rd-round pick. So there was some pretty good draft capital involved to make sure that Cleveland Browns acquired Elijah Moore. He's brought in, and look, Amari Cooper is still going to be the guy. I think he will still be the number 1 target. He will still have the most receptions, the most yards. Like, he is going to be the guy. But he's not the youngest pup either. We're looking at a 29-year-old Amari Cooper that probably has this year and next year. Maybe if everything works out, one more year after that where he can be a player. But he's even a potential cut candidate after this season. I don't think they will with how much the cap's going up, but that is in the realm of possibility. So they are going to be looking to see, can Elijah Moore fill that role as the target hog? I think he can. And look, the Browns don't have a lot of draft capital coming up after this season. They still have their next 2 firsts that are gone in the Deshaun Watson deal. So somebody's going to have to step up. And I think he can be the guy to do it. Now, do I think he's going to enter that wide receiver 1 conversation at any point? Probably not. Even when Amari Cooper's gone, I don't think it's realistic for him to enter that wide receiver 1 conversation. But could he be a wide receiver 3 this year? Yeah. And when Cooper's gone, could he enter that wide receiver 2 conversation? Yeah, I think those are in the realm of possibility. This offense is going to look different than it did before. We're not going to see as many 2 tight end sets. We're going to see them open it up, spread the ball out a little bit more. So I do like Elijah Moore. If I'm able to get him for a high 2nd, I'd be willing to give a high 2nd to get Elijah Moore. I don't think I would be willing to give a 1st in this year's class, but I would be willing to give a high 2nd to get Elijah Moore. So I do think that he is a player that I would keep my eye on. Legend of Carcoda, if I'm pronouncing that right. What is Quentin Johnston's most likely outcome for this year and then the future? So for this year, I think the most likely outcome is we see flashes. I think that's the most likely outcome. We still have Keenan Allen there. We still have Mike Williams there. So I don't think this is the year that we see these, big target numbers where we see the big spikes in production. I think it's going to be a couple games where he has that 3 or 4 catches and he caught one of them for a bomb. So he ends up with 110 yards and a touchdown. But week to week, I think it's going to be really inconsistent. Down the road, if he develops, he could end up being that team's number 1 wide receiver. Now, I have questions if he can really become that guy. I saw a lot of things missing on his tape that did concern me a little bit, specifically the ability to be able to tack the football consistently. If he can develop that, he's got some other tools that you can work with. But I really struggle with guys that don't have good ball skills because those guys do not typically translate into top-end wide receivers. Literally, think of all of the top fantasy football wide receivers from the past few years. We're talking about guys like Justin Jefferson. We're talking about guys like Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp. Like, all of these players have really good ball skills. They are able to catch the ball away from their body. They're able to go up and get it. They're able to do those types of things. That's not Quentin Johnston's game from what we've seen. We've seen consistently a body catcher that doesn't have a wide radius, a wide catch radius. So that's the concern. He is one of the biggest boom bust prospects in this class. Is there a realm of possibility where him and Justin Herbert connect and they form this great tandem and he develops and he really matures and becomes a real legitimate fantasy football wide receiver one? That range of outcome does exist. Is there also a range of outcome where he becomes Laviska Shenault? That range of outcome also exists. So that's the worry for me. Is it's a very boom bust prospect that I'm worried about. Will he be able to consistently be a player on that team that's going to have 5 catches for 70 plus yards and 8 plus touchdowns a season? Like, can he be that kind of player? I don't know. I really don't know. So that's kind of when we're talking about the range of outcomes, I think that's what we're looking at here with Quentin Johnston. All right, wanted to touch on just a couple other things. We have Awesome Nerds show coming up this coming Tuesday. We're just like we did here. Myself, Matt O'Hara, and Jared Wackerly. Rich is going to be gone, but the three of us, we're going to be doing a mock draft. So that is a show that I always look forward to, mock drafting with those guys. And we're going to talk about where the values are, where the pitfalls are, all of those types of things. Now, I wanted to double back on, we were talking with Andrew Cooper about Amon-Ra St. Brown and about Devontae Smith. The Nerds ADP actually has them a little further apart than I realized initially. So right now, basically it's pick 211 that Amon-Ra is coming off the board. Let's see, where Devontae Smith is coming off is pick 4-3. So almost a round and a half difference. And we're looking at wide receiver 7 versus wide receiver 14. Now, I'm comfortable taking Devontae Smith over a lot of the receivers that are above him. I would want him over DK Metcalf. I'd want him over Stephon Diggs, and I'd want him over Jackson Smith and Jigba. So that moves him up to the wide receiver 11. It would be really close between him and Tyreek Hill, but in a startup, I would probably take him over Tyreek Hill. So that would put him up to wide receiver 10. And then I think it's really close between him and Olave and him and T. Higgins. So I have them much closer together than the ADP does. But right now, Amon-Ra St. Brown is being looked at as a potential top 2 round guy, whereas Devontae Smith is falling into round 4. A couple other wide receivers of note that are in that range as well. Right behind him at wide receiver, we have Drake London, Cooper Kupp, and Devontae Adams. Now, I specifically, real quick, and those in the chat, feel free to talk about it as well, but Cooper Kupp and Devontae Adams are really interesting players. Right now, they're coming off the board mid to late 4th round. It's really tough to determine if that's good value or not, because if you're a win now team, I mean, getting those 2 players that point, fantastic. Absolutely fantastic that you would be able to get those 2 players around that point. But do we really expect them to be wide receiver 1s next year or the year after? Probably not. We're looking at 31-year-old wide receivers. Those guys don't have much time left. And we could even see the fallout happen this year. Now, we're talking about 2 elite players, so we expect them to be slight outliers. But the risk is absolutely there. So for me, I would much rather pass on those guys, maybe go running back in that range because we have Josh Jacobs right around there, Najee Harris right around there. I'm going to avoid those guys and wait around and then get myself some Michael Pittman Jr., then get myself some Debo, some Jordan Addison, Treylon Burks 2 rounds later. Like, those are the players that I would rather just kind of sit and wait and get those guys. So all of that, I do want to touch on DeAndre Hopkins, but we're going to wait for our boy Dennis Bennett, because he's going to be on momentarily, and we're going to be talking some DeAndre Hopkins. So let's give him a little bit of time to join us. And let me tell you again about the Fantasy Alarm All Sports subscription. Get all pro access to Fantasy Alarm for award-winning DFS playbook, covering 10 different sports, fantasy football, NFL betting, plus tools, podcasts, and the Discord chat. For a limited time, get all this for 50% off your first 6 months with promo code ALARM50. That's ALARM50 at fantasyalarm.com. Start your free trial today. So let's take a quick break. And when we come back, Dennis Bennett will be joining us. We're going to be talking DeAndre Hopkins, Scott Fishbowl, Dynasty metrics, all kinds of good stuff. We'll be back in a moment.
The Detroit Lions select Sam Laporta, tight end, Iowa.
Had to go with your boy Sam Laporta there to pair with TJ Hawkinson.
Sammy. I couldn't double down on rookie tight ends. I think I would take it. That's taking a little too far.
This could be one of the most exciting rookie tight end classes in a while, just based on the archetypes of these guys, of the Dalton Kincaids and the Sam Laportas. Obviously, Green Bay drafted two themselves with Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. So after Kincaid, I would say is probably the consensus with tight ends. Like, who do you like as far as the best ball, like end of best ball? Do you like Laporta, or is there anybody else you like more?
I do like Laporta. We're looking for guys that can be a top 2 target on their team. So any path, any argument you could make, right? So you can make the argument that Dalton Kincaid is going to be a top 2 target with after Stephon Diggs. You can make an argument that with Jamison Williams suspended, now Sam Laporta is just going to play straight up wide receiver. He looks like a wide receiver. Why can't he line up out wide at split end, right? It's like Marvin Jones and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I would also throw another name in the ring, and I don't mind, since we're doing this for the fans, for the kids. He's still on the board. Luke Musgrave on your Packers. They're not super loaded at wide receiver. We like the guy Reed they drafted, but you never know. So why can't Luke Musgrave be a big slot? In fact, they drafted 2 tight ends, Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. Tucker Kraft is more of an inline guy. They might just go 2 tight ends right away. Tucker Kraft inline, Luke Musgrave in the slot. Why can't he be a target monster for Jordan Love? So those are the guys, those are the conditions that you need for a rookie tight end to succeed. They need to not only be the best pass catching tight end on the team, but a top 2 pass catcher on the team outright. That's how you get Kyle Pitts. Evan Ingram as a rookie was top 5 because Odell Beckham Jr. hurt his knee 4 weeks into the year. So that's the formula. We're looking for guys that can actually be a top target right away. Otherwise, we're playing the sit and wait long-term game, which is what you're doing with guys like Michael Mayer.
Welcome back. It is the Dynasty Nerds on the Better Sports Network, and awesome segment earlier by Andrew, and we're preparing for another awesome segment here with Mr. Dennis Bennett. Dennis, how you doing, my man? Oh, Dennis, can you hear me? I do not think he can hear me. All right, he said he's not hearing me. So hopefully he gets all of his audio fixed, and we'll get him back here momentarily. But first, I want to touch on DeAndre Hopkins. So this past week, DeAndre Hopkins was released by the Arizona Cardinals. Now, this was not a huge surprise. This was something that we had been discussing as a real possibility at some point. But you never know when when it's actually going to come and happen. We hear rumors all the time that certain players are going to be released, certain players are going to be traded, and usually where there's smoke, there's fire, but sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's literally just smoke, and that's all there is. But DeAndre Hopkins did end up getting cut by the Arizona Cardinals, and this leaves a whole wake of fantasy football. What would be the best word here? Because destruction's not correct, but it changes a lot of things. So I mentioned earlier when we were talking about Rondale Moore a little bit. Rondale Moore is now interesting. Hollywood Brown is now interesting. Dennis Bennett is interesting. Dennis, can you hear me now, my man?
I can hear you now. I had
All
a
right.
wrong button pushed.
All good. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm fantastic. It's great to be back after a week off.
We missed
Flying
you, but
into summer.
it was for a good reason. Tell us why you were gone.
So my son, who recently turned 18, was graduating from high school. And so his ceremony was last Thursday night. And we had a little party, had it catered with some city barbecue, spent some time with the family. Real nice time. And, it was just a great time.
Good. Well, I'm glad you got that time with your family. I'm glad you got that time with your son. And you only get one of those opportunities. So I'm glad that you were able to, get all that together and spend some time with him. Now, he is going to the Ohio State University. Is that correct?
He is. He's going to study jazz guitar.
Jazz guitar. Awesome. Your mic's sounding crystal clear now. Everything's looking good, sounding good, feeling good. So let's touch on Deandre Hopkins. So I started talking about him a little bit here, but the potential impact can be felt already because they're already talking about what team he could land on, who it's going to affect, all that kind of stuff. But let's talk real quickly about the Arizona Cardinals first. So we know about Hollywood Brown and Rondale Moore. Those are kind of the two established guys. What do you think this is going to affect as far as their target share?
Well, Hollywood is going to be the guy until somebody comes along. It's really wild. Greg Dortch flashed last year, and honestly, I think the Cardinals should sign Jarrett Patterson and then trade for Connor Hayward from the Steelers, the tight end there, who's only 5'11", and it would be like the smallest team ever in the league. But Hollywood's going to get a big market share. The challenge is going to be how good can Colt McCoy be? Will Clayton Tune have to take over as a rookie? And how good can he be until Murray gets back? And then when Murray gets back, what we've seen in the past with him, though, is when he can't run, his effectiveness tends to go down a little bit. And coming back, I don't think he's going to be running right off the get. I think he's going to have to be more of a pocket guy, some rollouts and stuff. I think there can be fantasy production because overall the team isn't very good. So they're going to be behind. They're going to be trying to pass and play catch up. And when it's just over, they'll grind it out with James Conner, who will get the bulk of the carries, I think, at running back. I'm not real high on any of the fantasy assets there this year. I think Marquise Brown is a wide receiver 3. I'm okay with that. I think most people, though, will try to value him closer to a low-end wide receiver 2. So I don't know that I'll be getting any shares of him.
Yeah, I am one of the guys that's in on Hollywood Brown. We saw some really good things out of him last year, was able to produce in that offense, but it's not going to be the same offense this year. It's going to be a little bit different. So we'll have to see how all of that plays out. One name to keep an eye on, Michael Wilson, a player that they drafted in the 3rd round, and he certainly fits the size profile that you're looking for when you lose a player like DeAndre Hopkins. So he might be another interesting one to just kind of keep an eye out on how they're using him, how often they're using him. But his biggest issue has always been injury history. Similar to Kyler Murray now, availability has been very sparse for a guy like Michael Wilson. So will be interesting to see how that all plays out. Now, when we look at the rest of the fantasy landscape, where do you think DeAndre Hopkins goes? Because there's a lot of rumors out there, but it's tough to really nail down which ones are legitimate.
Well, I think the Kansas City rumors, I may have started those back in January. I've been calling for him to Kansas City since January. Or in Buffalo, I think those are all very legit. I think other teams are going to sniff around. He wants to win. He wants to be a prominent player, and he wants to win. And those two teams both have opportunity for him to do both. I don't think he's going to consider like Cincinnati. They have Tyler Boyd and two very, very good receivers. To me, Baltimore, well, it might be a feel-good story because he's buddies with Lamar. I just don't see the production there for him. Maybe they could make a run and go for it, but their defense struggled an awful lot last year. And even if they increase their passing volume, it's not going to be, 650 passes. It's going to be 480 or 500 passes probably. And so it just makes too much sense for it to be Kansas City or Buffalo.
Yeah, so two other teams I want to throw into the mix just because there's a lot of rumors flying about these teams. The Cleveland Browns, obviously because of his connection with Deshaun Watson. And then a rumor popped up today, which this one surprised me and didn't make a lot of sense unless he just really loved his time there. But the rumor has popped up that he might be willing to go back to Houston as well. Any thoughts on those two?
Houston doesn't make any sense. I mean, they're tearing it down and rebuilding completely from both sides. I mean, to be fair, nothing Houston has done in the past 4 years has made a lot of sense. So, I mean, they drafted Stroud and Will Anderson this year, seemingly to anchor each side of their team, but they're not going to be ready anytime soon to make a playoff push. Cleveland, it feels like they're going to pass more. They didn't invest heavily in bringing in a timeshare back with Nick Chubb, which, maybe not so much last year, but the year before, Kareem Hunt was more of that. Chubb just is so efficient when he runs. It didn't really seem like it, but they used Hunt an awful lot. I don't think Jerome Ford is going to get used like that. They may still bring in a veteran running back. The wide receiver 2 spot in Cleveland, there's Elijah Moore, who's probably going to be in the slot. And it would maybe make sense, but I don't know that financially, or are there enough balls to go around? I mean, you've got Amari Cooper. It isn't like DeAndre Hopkins is going to come into Cleveland and be the wide receiver 1 for the next 5 years. He's 2 years older than Amari Cooper?
Yeah.
And quietly, Cooper can be a little bit aggressive. I mean, he's just because he's not loud and brash and making a ton of news for doing stupid shit doesn't mean he's not aggressive. So I like Cooper as the wide receiver 1 and Moore as the 2. And then you got to piece together. You got Njoku and I think Njoku and Hopkins would kind of play the same area, that intermediate. Hopkins is great. I don't think Cleveland's going to the Super Bowl. As much as I want it to happen, I think we're a couple years away probably.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. So real
I
quickly,
think for Hopkins, if he goes to Buffalo, he becomes the number 2 there. It keeps Kincaid from rising. It puts Gabe Davis back in the wide receiver 3 role where he's best. If he goes to Kansas City, I think he becomes the perfect complement to Travis Kelce. They just swap sides of the field and kind of take over and do what they do, and then let Mahomes. One of the big things is that Stephon Diggs and Travis Kelce had roughly the same amount of targets and same amount of catches last year. Kelce had a 28% target share in Kansas City, and Diggs had a 24% in Buffalo. The difference is that Kansas City threw the ball about 100 more times and for over 1,000 yards more. And I think, they're a passing team. Allen runs the ball, but they've beefed up the running game in Buffalo. I think they realize they have to be able to do that part of the game. I still think it's Kansas City.
Still think it's KC. Yeah. I think that they are the odds-on favorite, and I think that makes a lot of sense for him to end up there. Now, we weren't originally going to take trade questions in this segment, But when the better boss has a trade question, you take it, right? So
Right.
so we're gonna answer this, and I know you're a little bit, at least I believe you're a little bit more of an IDP guy than I am, correct?
Yes, I play in, I don't know, 3 or 4 IDP leagues.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to let you kind of field this one more so than I'm going to, because you'll have a better idea here. Dynasty IDP league trade. I'm rebuilding, traded Tyreek Hill and Cam Jordan for Aiden Hutchinson, Darnell Mooney, Dwayne McBride, and a probably low number 1 pick. So I'm guessing that's in 2024. How did I do?
So if he's rebuilding, I think he did great.
I
Aiden
think so, too.
Hutchinson, a young stud. Cam Jordan, he's doing TV. He's gonna play a couple more years, but we're looking at the sunset there. Tyreek Hill, I know he's talked about he's gonna retire in 3 years or whatnot. Who knows what's gonna really come of that? Hill's the best player in the deal by far. Mooney, he's probably going to be a wide receiver 3-4, functional while you're rebuilding. Dwayne McBride, I think we all liked him. He's an exciting runner, great contact balance, maybe not the best long speed, but he's a quality back. And, we up until yesterday, I think we all thought Dalvin Cook was getting cut, but that didn't happen. So McBride's going to settle in as the running back 3 there in Minnesota, at least until next year. But I think there's an opportunity for McBride to be a viable running back for fantasy, probably a flex-worthy running back next year. And a low first-round pick, I mean, a first-round pick is a first-round pick. I think you did okay, mostly because I think Aiden Hutchinson is a substantial upgrade over Cameron Jordan, especially if it's, a balanced scoring league where you end up with defensive players scoring on par with offensive players. Now, not a lot of them are going to score on par with Tyreek Hill, but
No, I'm with you. I'm not a huge IDP guy, but getting a first round pick, especially if it's a lower end one, the players in the top end of next year's class are looking pretty darn good with Harrison and Caleb Williams and Drake May. So if you end up getting a top 3 pick, you could argue the top 3 pick is just worth it in and of itself if it ends up being there. If not, then you need the other pieces, obviously. But I do like that as well. All right, so let's transition real quickly from this to, we talked a little bit beforehand about metrics, and so I am more of a film guy. Dennis, would you consider yourself more film, more data driven, more production as far as like statistics? Like, where do you glean the most value on how you value players?
So it depends on my mood. I'm a hybrid. I think you have to do both. So a lot of times if I see film of a player, and we have so much film in the film room, it's hard not to see. Right. So when I'm scouting rookies, I'll look at them and I develop a profile, a film profile in my head. What do I think? How does this guy play? Well, then I want to look at the numbers and see, do they support that? David Bell is a great example of that. You were talking about him earlier. Great analytics profile, but not great on tape. So we see guys like that. Conversely, if I'm going through, pages of numbers and guys start to pop out with things, let's say somebody's got a great yards per route run over in college and they had an early breakout. And so I'm looking at them and then I want to go look at the tape and see, well, does the tape support what I'm seeing in the spreadsheet?
Right.
I don't have a formal model, and because I'm not Brad Custer, one of our Dynasty Nerds analytics guys. So I don't build a lot of that sophisticated stuff, but there are things like yards per route run that will tell you, hey, this guy's pretty good. And you can kind of look at it from an already in the NFL perspective. If I'm doing a startup, I'm looking for target share. How much volume is a player getting?
Are they being productive with it? What's their catch rate? So if I got a player with a high ADOT and a lower catch rate, I don't get worked up about it too much. But if I got somebody with a 9-yard ADOT and a 58% catch rate, then I start to worry because those things don't match.
Right.
We've seen it. 20-yard, 30-yard, 40-yard passes are harder to catch than 3-yard bubble screen.
Right. So when you're looking at some of these metrics, because like I said, I'm more of a film guy, so those are things that I'm gleaning more information from than the data. But I would be lying if I didn't say that there weren't certain data points that I look to, specifically coming out of college, but even guys that are still in the NFL, there are things that I like to see. So what are some of the things that you specifically look for when you're trying to figure out what players I like, what players I don't?
For receivers, I like yards of separation because that tells me on paper they're getting open and I can go look at the tape and verify it. Running backs, yards after contact. But I also like to pair that with yards before contact because someone like Tank Bigsby, who kind of getting an old school reputation because he was getting hit in the backfield all the time and still gaining a decent amount of yards. It wasn't like, I don't think he was top 10 in yards after contact, but he gained right around 1,000 yards, and his yards before contact was something like, 1.6 or something. He was getting hit early and often because that Auburn line was so bad. And so you have to pull that thing together to kind of create that whole picture.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. So for me, there's a couple different ones that I look at when I feel like I use data more for wide receivers. And today the Fork actually asked, are rookie running backs or wide receivers harder to hit on based on your film, on just film review? And for me, I think wide receivers are harder because running backs, I feel like I can glean a lot from watching their tape. But wide receivers, it's tricky because there's so many different roles that wide receivers can play. And just because they play a certain role in college doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to play the same role at the NFL. So trying to translate that simply just by, watching the film it can be real difficult. So, one of the ones I do really like to look at ADOT, so average depth of target. When I see guys in college that have a really low ADOT, I don't love seeing that because, and we were actually, Andrew and I were kind of touching on that a little bit. You're telling me that you're more or less having to manufacture a lot of touches to make sure you get this guy the football. Now, if they're doing that for guys at the NFL level, I love that. That's exciting. That's awesome. But when they're doing that for guys at the college level, I worry that it's just, he's the best player on our offense, so we got to make sure we get him the ball, but we can't seem to get him the ball any farther than 10 yards down the field. Like if it's past 10 yards down the field, we have a hard time getting the football. Now, sometimes that's on the quarterback, but a lot of times that's the receiver having a hard time getting open. So ADOT ends up being one that I look at quite a bit as far as that goes. And then I really like air yards, and that's specifically more for one that is at the NFL level. I don't look at as much at the college level, but when I'm trying to identify players that I think are undervalued, air yards basically tell you how far downfield, if they were to make a play on every ball, like how many yards would that be? And so it's basically saying, how is the quarterback targeting this player? Are they looking for them on big plays? Are they targeting them often? Because the more often that they're targeting them, the more air yards are going to be there. So that's another one that I look at is air yards is, I think, another interesting one that I really like for wide receivers. But for running backs, I don't tend to look at many metrics. Do you think I should be looking more at metrics for some of these running backs?
Well, I think a lot of what we have to do is we have to contextualize the film and the numbers And with running backs, I think the offensive line plays such a big role when they're an inside runner. And if they're not good at blocking, it just makes that job harder. There's something like Cam Akers has been getting a good opportunity out in Los Angeles, but when he came out, he was highly regarded as having the worst vision of those top 5 backs. And we've pretty much expected him to not be real successful because of that. He was going to get opportunity because he was really good and athletic. And as long as he was in space, he was going to be able to do some stuff. But if he had to go down the line and look for the hole, he was probably going to miss it. And I think when we're putting everything in context, for running backs, I think that is more important to see, well, what can they do? It's Tank Bigsby is the example from this year's class because he had defenders in the backfield so often. The wide receivers, I think it's a little bit different because it's oftentimes it's just them and one other guy out there or them and 2 other guys out there. And so we don't always know, are they making the right read on there? If it's a choice route, did they make the right read? Things like that. Did the quarterback make the wrong throw? Especially when we're trying to watch, 5, 6, 7, 8 games of these guys while we're trying to get ready to put together an evaluation. So I like kind of the process that you're talking about, but I think you got to kind of pull the film will contextualize running backs, at least on the inside, better than I think it does the wide receivers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the one thing I do look at, you mentioned offensive line. I do like to look at Football Outsiders and talking about, their offensive line grades and things like that. I think that is really valuable information when contextualizing how much of this is what the running back did, how much of this is just really good or really poor offensive line play. Because sometimes we see guys come out, Zach Charbonnet is a good example from this year's class where he's the opposite of Tank Bigsby. He's the antithesis because he had amazing offensive line play. Like watching, and I didn't even need the numbers to tell me that, but when I looked at the numbers, it affirmed it. Like there were some massive, massive holes consistently created for him in the UCLA offense. So sometimes that makes it a little trickier to evaluate because how much of that was him making plays and how much of that was, man, Dennis, you and I could have gained yards behind that offensive line. So I think that's something that can be a little tricky with some of this. So any other numbers that you like to really look at, whether that would be for quarterbacks, tight ends, running backs, receivers, doesn't really matter. Are there any other metrics that you really like to lean on when you're trying to make decisions about your roster?
Quarterbacks, I like to kind of look at fantasy points per dropback.
Okay.
That it's a small number and it can be, when you're looking at it and it's like 0.8 or 1.2 and you're trying to sort it out. But that gives you an idea of how well the quarterback is producing overall for fantasy in the passing game. Are they getting yards? It's like I was thinking about air yards right before you brought them up, and air yards is a great way to look. We're always looking for sleepers, but right now in the industry, it's pretty hard to. A sleeper is pretty much just a guy that we all got lucky on because something happened in front of him. Because so many people are doing research on all these players now. And I lost my point I was making there.
It's all good. That happens to me all the time where I just start, it's kind of the Michael Scott effect where, he just starts talking and you're not really sure where you're going to go, but you just hope you find it along the way. But no, that makes a lot of sense as well. So
sound like somebody turned a lawnmower on outside and got distracted.
This is pretty late for
I know. Like it's Ohio. It's almost 11 o'clock.
That's pretty funny. One other one that I like to look at, and then, maybe we can jump to some of the Scott Fishbowl stuff that you were talking about. But the last one that I do like to look at is I like to look at neutral pass versus run situations. So especially when I'm looking at landing spots, like what are some of the good landing spots, or when coordinators switch jobs, I like to look at that because that tells me with their old team anyway, how often were they passing in neutral situations? How often were they running the football in neutral situations? Should I be worried about this running back that I have because they're not going to run it as often anymore? Or should I be more excited about this quarterback because they're going to look to throw it down the field? So like Tampa Bay was one of the best examples last year. They threw the ball in neutral situations a ridiculous amount, like just an absurd amount. Whereas other teams like the Chicago Bears and the Atlanta Falcons ran the ball as many opportunities as they could. Like anytime it even sort of kind of made sense to run the football, they were running the football. So that'll tell you a lot about what players to invest in based on what the team tendencies or the coordinator tendencies are. So that's kind of the last one that I wanted to touch on, because I do think that that's a valuable resource when trying to kind of evaluate those situations.
Well, I was thinking about it this afternoon after we were texting, and it's like, I think we need to develop a continuity score. Like when you've got a quarterback and a head coach and an offensive coordinator in their first year, there's going to be growing pains, even if it's a veteran. But when you get into that second year, they're settled into the offense. How much change is happening on the offensive line? I think that continuity should lead to a big step by the offense. So we're looking at in New York with Daniel Jones and Brian Daboll going into year 2, in Chicago with Eberflus and I think Getsy's the OC there, and Justin Fields, versus we got a rookie quarterback in Carolina and Houston with rookie head coaches. Though Reich, I wouldn't call him a rookie necessarily, but first year guys are. How does Eric Bieniemy, what's the effect going to be on the Washington offense? But they also have a new quarterback. So if Ron Rivera makes it through this year and they go into next year and Howell's still the quarterback, Bieniemy's still the OC, Rivera's still the head coach, what kind of step can we expect them to take as an offense next year?
Absolutely. No, I'm with you. And that's something that I've touched on to some extent on the Nerds Pod quite a bit, where that second year with the same offensive coordinator, the same quarterback, and the same head coach, you almost 100% of the time, you see increased production from that offense. We saw it, last year was a great example for the Philadelphia Eagles. That year 1 was good, but it wasn't great. Year 2, holy cow, like things just took off. So, the Steelers are another example that, maybe that happens for them this year, even though we don't love Matt Canada. You'd almost wish he was gone, but still,
but he's not.
So hopefully there's some good mojo there with everybody vibing. So before we talk about these Scott Fish Bowl things, just Josh said he would like to speak to the Mr. Scott Fish himself. He said his invite might have gotten lost in the mail, and he would be a great candidate to clean house in the Scott Fish Bowl. So, Scott, if you're out there listening, maybe the invite got lost in the mail. So you were mentioning today about some of the Scott Fish Bowl mocks that are going on. Now, I want to let you say what you want about them, because I have a couple thoughts on some of them, because I've looked through some of them and I find it a little interesting. So I'll let you start, and then I'll take over from there, because I have some perspective on some of these mocks.
So with mocks, you have to be clear on what they are. What mocks are really doing is teaching you the pivots. So I may be looking at, let me get over here to this ADP. So I'm in the 7 spot, and in this ADP, Justin Jefferson is the 107. This is a group of 20 mock drafts. So Jefferson is the 107. Well, there's Mahomes, Hurts, Allen, Burrow, Jackson, and Herbert going off before him. But we know how important quarterbacks are.
Jefferson is a pivot. Somebody didn't take him earlier, or somebody didn't take McCaffrey. I actually did a mock draft, a Scott Fish mock draft earlier. McCaffrey went 104, and so one of those top 6 quarterbacks fell to where I was at 107. I didn't take it. It was Lamar that fell according to this ADP. I actually went with Trevor Lawrence.
Okay.
Over Lamar at the 107. I debated, do I want to, when I looked at the ADP, I thought, all right, I can build some power at wide receiver, running back, and come back. And the more I thought about it, the way this scoring is set up, it's like, do I want to have Derek Carr be my QB1? Is that really, do I want to have, am I building around Carr and Goff and Ritter? Is that where I'm building my quarterback room? And I decided, no, that wasn't it. I went ahead and I drafted Lawrence at the 107, and I drafted Aaron Rodgers in the 4th round. And according to the ADP, I reached a little bit on Aaron Rodgers, but my thought was, he's got a point to prove, a chip on his shoulder. I'm investing in, I'll show you. I'm investing in ego.
I'm glad you mentioned Aaron Rodgers, because I saw several mocks where he was going 5th, 6th, or 7th round, which to me was absurd. When you're talking about the Scott Fishbowl scoring, and that's the thing that I've worried about with some of these mocks that I've seen, is I worry that it is teaching people incorrectly, because based on the scoring, if a quarterback is not going to turn the ball over a lot and has any chance of scoring some touchdowns, he's got to be taken in the first 3 to 4 rounds. Like, just has to. So the fact that a guy like that can go that late was always surprising to me. Another one that's surprising. Now, I don't know what the ADP there says. And so I'm curious, where does it have Travis Kelce going?
Kelce was obviously the tight end 1. He was the 112 in the ADP.
Okay. That's not as bad as some of the other drafts I've seen, but many of the drafts that I saw, he was going in the mid-2nd round, which I don't remember a single draft from last year. And the scoring is the same as last year. And Kelsey's the same.
Some people took him at the 101.
Exactly. Like, he's being taken more than likely in the top 7 to 8 picks. Or if he's not, he should be taken in the top 7 to 8 picks. So
that's 28% target share.
Yeah. So that's the thing is, I worry with some of these because they're defaulting to like sleeper dynasty settings where people are taking these players, even though they feel like they're taking them higher than they should be. It's still not as high as they should actually be going. Does that make sense?
It does. I was just looking through the ADP, and Rodgers isn't in the top 50.
Yeah, it's crazy.
This ADP I'm looking at, and I took him at looks like about 46, 47. So, question for you.
Okay.
My 2nd round pick at the 106, I took Austin Eckler. Let's see, what would he be? 4th running back off the board. How do you feel about Austin Eckler?
I see. That's another one that I feel like running backs are going to go a little bit higher. So I think that's a fantastic pick because you're also getting that first down. When they get a first down, you're getting a point there. So those running backs should be boosted a little bit.
His
Austin
ADP
Eckler
is 20 on this ADP.
Okay, it's 20.
Yep.
Yeah, at the 2.6, I mean, even on the ADP that you're getting a little bit of a value, but I'm surprised that I didn't see Taylor and some of those guys a little bit higher than they were. I thought that they would have first round ADP. Like, where's Jonathan Taylor at?
He went at the 201.
Okay.
His ADP, let's see, McCaffrey was 11. Taylor was 18.
Okay. See, yeah, I would have a hard time if I'm at the end of the first round not taking Jonathan Taylor. The first downs, the rushing yardage, and the excitement with that new quarterback there in Anthony Richardson. Like, I would have a hard time not taking him at that point. So the other thing I noticed is just in general, older players seem to go later than they should. And like I said, I think it's because of like the dynasty rankings, the dynasty format. But I would see Davante Adams falling to the 3rd round, the 4th round. I would see Cooper Kupp falling to the 3rd and 4th round. Where does that ADP have him? Those two guys.
So Davante Adams, I must have passed him, is Diggs. He was at 29. And who was the other one?
Cooper Kupp.
Cooper Kupp. Kupp was at 21.
Okay.
So a
Coop's in
late
good
first
spot.
and mid second?
Late 2nd and mid 3rd.
Yeah. Late second, mid third.
So that's not as bad for Cooper Kupp. That's better than I had been seeing. But I still think Davante Adams, I'm still surprised. And I get it. There's question marks about the quarterback situation. So I can understand that. That's better than what I saw. Now, the other thing we have to prepare for, and I think the mock drafts are really helpful for this part. Where do those kickers start coming off the board? Because most of us have gotten used to not playing with kickers anymore. And so to start drafting kickers again is really hard to kind of adjust to. So where are we seeing those guys go?
So I actually took the first kicker in the mock that I did tonight.
Okay.
I took where'd it go? I took Justin Tucker at the 1607.
Okay.
In the he's pick 177 in the mock.
Okay. So that's not super far off from where you took him.
Yep.
So
and
that
Evan
sounds about right.
McPherson was 185. Then they were over 200 before they went. And honestly, my thinking was, well, I can flex the kicker. So if I'm going to take one, I'm 16 rounds in. I've got a starting lineup. I probably waited too long on tight ends. I ended up, I was targeting a couple and they got picked. And so I just kind of waited. I ended up taking Dalton Kincaid as my first tight end at 9-6. Followed him up with Chigo Okonkwo at 10-7. And then later I added Tucker Kraft in the 21st.
All right,
I'll be
Dennis,
working the waiver wire.
Time. I hate to cut you off. We're about to run out of time here. Where can the folks find you on Twitter?
At culture_coach.
All right. And you can find me. You can find me on Twitter at Dynasty Price. We will be back again, Dennis, myself, and a brand new guest next week. We will see you guys next Thursday.